Hi, Jeremy Cordeaux in the Court of Public Opinion. I'm just on air here to let you know that we'll be live streaming the Court of Public Opinion every Friday between 9 o'clock and 12 on jeremycordeaux.com. Please join us. We'd love to have you.
Talking About Marketing is a podcast for business owners and leaders, produced by my dad, Steve Davis, and his colleague at Talked About Marketing, David Olney, in which they explore marketing through the lens of their own 4 Ps: person, principles, problems, and perspicacity. Yes, you heard that correctly. Apart from their love of words, they really love helping people. So they hope this podcast will become a trusted companion on your journey in business.
Hello, I'm Steve Davis, and I'm sitting here with my little baristador espresso in front of me. David Olney, welcome to our first episode together of Talking About Marketing.
Have to say, feeling very excited. It's at least a few months since we recorded a podcast together.
Yes, exactly. When I joined one of yours and vice versa. So you've got some coffee there today?
I have a pretend pink coffee.
What I like, it's all upside, isn't it? That's all upside.
Yep, particularly when it's pink.
All right, so the theme for today's program, episode 1, is called Finding Your Story to Tell. If I bumped into you into an elevator and asked you to tell me why is that the topic, what would be your quick pitch?
Because it's what our brain is wired to understand. Our brains are story machines, not logic machines.
All right, I'll sip some coffee. Let's get ready to start.
Our 4 Ps. Number 1, person. The aim of life is self-development, to realise one's nature perfectly. That is what each of us is here for. Oscar Wilde.
All right, it's time for me to look at something to help the person of you listening who runs a business or is in a leadership position. And I've got a topic dear to your heart, David Olney: Stoic testing.
I don't know whether to sound serious or giggle hysterically that we start with something I like so much.
So I wonder if you could just, again, briefly, the Stoics, how would you describe the Stoics? Because, dear listener, this is definitely focused on life in 2022 and beyond, but it's tapping into some ancient wisdom for the little hook I want to share with you this morning. How would you describe the Stoics, David?
Probably 2 important things for our listeners to think about. First of all, the first Stoics were in ancient Greece, and the original Stoics were hardcore Stoics. They were all about relinquishing connection to the world around them and living very aesthetic lives. We don't want to do that. That's bad, because that way you live in a barrel and you just go around lifting food off stalls in the market and eating it, and when people yell at you, you just shrug and wander off. So we don't want to do that.
No.
But when Stoicism got its second sort of iteration was in Rome. And the big difference with the Roman Stoics is the Roman Stoics were very often very successful. A lot of them, in modern terms, would have at least been millionaires. Some would have been on the verge of being billionaires. And what gave them both an edge philosophically and in life was a simple but difficult calculation. What things can I control and what things can't I control? And the Stoic approach was, if you can take control of it, do it in a way today so that you can know you can do it well again tomorrow. But if it's something that you can't control, if you can't control the weather, well, your only response is then to control your response to things. So it's about to hail on you. Is there any point having a tantrum? No. Is there any point complaining? No. Put your cloak over your head and get on with what you need to do. So the big 2 things were work out what you have control over, and if you don't have control over it, work out how to manage your response.
And that's why I wanted to bring this little snippet that I've taken from another podcast here, because I did the sums the other day, been in front of working with 8,000 plus business people in my time, 20 odd years doing this. And I've noticed in working with people and in my own life, we often come across a catastrophic scenario that unfolds, that's unkind, that threatens a business. Sometimes it's due to macro reasons outside business, and sometimes it can be personal, it can be humans, toxic humans who are either enemies from outside the gates or someone from within who they've got it in for you for some reason, for whatever thing that's going on inside their mind. And in thinking about how this ends up impacting a business, it becomes cancerous if we carry the anger and resentment and bitterness because of things that have come from other people or other scenarios that have unfolded. And that's why hearing a short series on applying Stoicism to today's life by philosopher William B. Irvine grabbed my attention. I got this from the Sam Harris app called Waking Up. I've got links in the show notes if you want to listen to more of this. And Professor Irvine talks about using a stoic testing mentality when something does take you by surprise in a negative way, or you're still dealing with some bitterness from being crossed and double crossed. And believe me, I think we've all had that happen from time to time. I certainly have. I have found this simple little trick or technique really powerful. So let's have a listen to how he sets up this concept of imagining if something bad happens being framed as if some ancient Stoic gods up in the sky are sending a challenge our way.
To pass a Stoic test, you must do two things. First, you must find and implement a workaround for the setback in question. And second, you must keep your cool while doing so. You must not, in particular, become angry, flustered, frustrated, or despondent in the aftermath of the setback. As an experienced Stoic test taker, allow me to offer a few tips on how to take these tests. One is to keep the 5-second rule in mind. The 5-second rule with respect to setbacks says that when set back, you must implement the Stoic test frame within 5 seconds. Otherwise, you'll likely experience negative emotions, with feelings of anger being the biggest danger. Anger is easy to trigger, and once triggered, it can have a profound impact on your life. By quickly treating a setback as a Stoic test, though, you can sidetrack the primitive component of your brain that's the source of your anger. Not to worry, you tell it. This is just a test by the Stoic gods. Oh, and that person who caused the setback? Don't blame him. He's just the Stoic god's lackey. If anything, you should pity him.
Very much like your introduction, David, what Professor Irvine is pointing out there is, yes, these things can happen. Now, I love the theatrical framing that there are these Stoic gods wanting to test me because it shifts my mental position. And also considering that the bad actor in it is just a lackey being used by the gods, I know it's not real. But it's amazing how the theatre of that has lessened the weight I carry from the people who have hoodwinked me in the past. And I know it's not the full usage of everything from Stoicism, but I find it very practical, David.
William Irvine is great at making sure people can capture a big idea in a small, engaging way. You know, listeners, some of you might find a little bit about William Irvine's life helpful too. He was, on paper, a successful philosophy professor doing okay, and realizing that his students didn't really pay any attention and he wasn't getting any joy out of what he was teaching. And he wondered where his life was going, and then he started reading Stoicism and decided to start living his life as a Stoic. He started doing things to practice difficult days, like on a cold day not putting the heater on, on a hot day not putting the air conditioner on. He went back to doing sport in his 50s to prepare to be in the Masters Games from memory as a rower. And he started talking about Stoicism as something you actually live and do. And guess what? His students started paying attention, turning up to class, asking questions, and being really engaged in what he was doing because it had gone from talking about philosophy to living with a philosophy that improved life.
Yeah.
So whether you can use his story well of the Stoic gods, or whether you just watch an interview with him and get a sense of what happens when you find a good toolkit that helps keep you disciplined and calm, Doesn't really matter how you get to the good end point, but
Yeah.
give both versions a go and see which one sticks for you.
And that's why I wanted to share it today, because there are enough headwinds in life and in business without the headwinds of making bad situations or bad actors worse than they are, because it robs us of the chance of taking a fresh look to work out, well, how do we move forward from here? So hopefully this application of real life philosophy will be a benefit to all.
Our 4 Ps. Number 2, principles. You can never be overdressed or overeducated. Oscar Wilde.
The main topic today, which has given us the title for this episode's theme, is all about storytelling. And I remember just recently for the Tourism Industry Council of SA, I ran a workshop that I co-planned with David on unlocking storytelling as an actually powerful part of your marketing and not just the trendy thing, because storytelling has become a bit of a buzzword in the marketing field. And we're going to talk a little bit deeper about storytelling because you've written a great paper, David, that's looked into a lot of the research behind the application of storytelling. But one of the visual cues I used in this workshop was playing a little clip of Superman, in which Superman confronts Lex Luthor, who suddenly exposes some kryptonite to Superman and he weakens and falls back. And the point being that if the Superman story did not have something like kryptonite in it, it would not only be the most boring superhero movie of all time, because Superman could fix everything, they'd actually be really short movies. They'd last 5 minutes. You have the bad thing happen, and then Superman fixes it all. It's in this interplay, the challenge, the struggle against this Achilles heel, this kryptonite that creates interest, draws us in as humans. And I think that's a lovely setup, David, if you wanted to talk through some of what your research has uncovered in looking at the literature about using storytelling in a marketing context.
Absolutely. And I think a good place to start here is the fact that when we were getting ready to do the tourism workshop that you did, that we came up with the idea of kryptonite and getting the prop of a prop that looks like a piece of kryptonite that you were able to take along and show the audience. Because it's very easy to get lost in the theoretical side of something like storytelling. So when I started working on this paper, I think in the end I read something like 40 sources written over about a 20-year period on the different way storytelling has been used in Hollywood, in marketing, in digital marketing, in making new content for social media in the last couple of years during COVID. And the common theme, of course, kept coming back to Joseph Campbell's idea of the hero's journey, which is a big and complicated set of steps that the ideal story should follow. But the critical thing at the center of Campbell, and that nearly everyone focuses on in their own writing, is that someone tries to achieve something and they're blocked. And they're not blocked in a small way, they're blocked to the point where actually continuing is really difficult. Something is bigger and more complicated than they've ever experienced, and they genuinely don't know what to do about it. So not only do they have to learn a new skill and try and do new things, they then have to take the risk of confronting something that has already beaten them once. And that almost every story that sticks in humans' heads has some sort of struggle like this, or we forget it. So in the case of the Superman example, the really obvious and powerful one is the kryptonite. But the secondary struggle is Superman, letting Lois Lane know how he feels about her.
Mhm.
And is she going to work out who Superman is early on? So we've got different kinds of struggle layered on top of each other. And this is the point with struggle. It can be a struggle with self. It can be a struggle with other people. It can be a struggle to be given an opportunity. It can be a struggle to get resources. It can be a combination of all of them. But in the majority of cases, the honesty to talk about that struggle is a huge first step. And one of the interesting that struck me in the storytelling literature was almost no one said anything about Brené Brown and all her writing on being vulnerable. And I didn't talk about it in my paper because no one else had, and I was submitting this thing to get marks for my master's.
Mm.
But being vulnerable is a critical part of telling a good story, because if whatever your struggle was didn't make you feel vulnerable, I'm not entirely sure it's a real struggle.
And as an audience member, I know we're talking within the marketing context of something that will go on your about page or in blogs or the nerve and fiber of when you describe your business to people. But any story, it's it's the emergence of that. In fact, there's two things. The emergence of that struggle is what makes us lean in
Mm.
and actually care. But also, there's another point too. It's the fact that there's a reason stories begin with once upon a time, or one of the examples in the tourism workshop was people running a homestead out in the outback when these floods came, when they had guests staying at the time. And instead of just coming in with, oh, the floods, actually setting up the scene of the call to adventure that happens for the business by saying it was a normal day doing this, and then suddenly rain came beyond what was expected and flooding occurred. And so you've got this dramatic shift, which again leans us in instead of just making quick assumptions and cutting to the bit that you want to get across.
We've always got the setup in any good movie or any good book of what normal looks like, because you need some reason to be interested in your character and to have some idea of what your character's going to do before something really difficult happens. And it's a bit different with businesses and marketing, but I can give my own example here, and that is, being blind. Lots of things turn out to be a struggle, and making the decision to be vulnerable and admit that lots of things are a struggle is difficult. But if people understand how hard you have to work to do what you do well, they learn a new appreciation for how much you care about you do and how much effort you put into getting it right. So if you can get that across to your prospective clients, your customers, people who might want to be your ultimate and best advocates, that's a really powerful thing that they can share to make people pay attention to what you do.
And I know we are going to, as a footnote, one of if I can find a silver lining with blindness, David, in working with me, it means you don't have to stare at my face the whole time.
I'm not going to make any comment, because if someone sounds as lovely as you, they have to be handsome.
Well, look, we're going to probably dip our beaks into storytelling many times in the coming seasons and episodes. But in your paper, you condense the themes of effective storytelling for marketing. I think this might be a useful time to ground this, to give people a foothold to start rethinking how they tell their story. If I whip through the 7 of them, and then if you could just perhaps draw our attention to the ones that are most readily available for most small to medium-sized businesses and organizations to grab hold of. Good plan?
Good plan.
All right. So these are the 7 categories of storytelling themes. So if you're going to tell a story, working within a theme, a thematic structure can help. I mean, Superman happens within the superhero structure, for example. So here we go. We've got craft, innovation, origins, myth, celebrity, provenance, and collectability. There we go. There's 7. And in the show notes, we'll have links to you can read the paper and get them in full context. But David, give us an idea of how we might take 1, 2, or 3 of these and perhaps start rethinking about how we might tell our stories within these themes.
I think a really important thing to keep in mind at the beginning of this is each of the 7 is contextualized by the fact if it's not authentic, people can tell. So if you're going to tell an origin story, it needs to sound authentic. If you're going to talk about how you developed your craft, it needs to be authentic. If you want to come up with a myth about your company that's a bit tongue-in-cheek, you can give it a go, but if it doesn't sound like it could be true, probably don't do it, even if it's meant to be a myth. So like, even if you're running a little hotel and you create a ghost story about the ghost that lives upstairs,
Mm-hmm.
It might make people excited, but if you make that too extreme too much, people go, yeah, it's a marketing trick, and you'll lose people rather than have them interested in the idea that just maybe something's a bit odd when you stay upstairs in this little hotel. So to start with, probably the most important and the most available for most people, it's starting with your origin story. Yeah? And it's not just how did the business happen, it's why did you want to start the business? How long did it take to get the resources together? How long did it take to get the skills together? How many people's doubts did you have to overcome? How many of your own doubts did you have to overcome?
Mm.
When you started, how much of it did you get right on the first iteration? Now, hopefully you got a bit right and it made it a bit easier to grow and keep going. But surely you didn't get everything right, because otherwise it's going to be a pretty boring story.
And these are the stories that make us have an aha moment as a reader or a listener and it's very common in the businesses I've worked with in organizations. It's someone who is a prime mover who is finding something wrong with the world and they've come up with their solution. And this is what gets me. Often people throw sticks and stones at small business people in particular, saying they're on their tools too much, they're on their tools. But in fact, it is that initial phase of getting in, getting hands dirty to make the world better for people.
Mm.
That is where the origin story is. That needs to be celebrated.
And I think to remember too that origin story can very much be that the job you were doing before your current business is what you had to fix. So I can very happily say to people that I enjoyed most of my 19 years of teaching in university, but by the end I'd hit burnout and I needed to be doing something else. So part of the reason I'm here now working with you is because I needed to do something new. And there was the whole process of changing direction, taking big risks, doing something new, learning new skills, applying things differently, which is the initial part of the story. Even before you know if there's any chance you're going to be successful at what you're doing now, the story about why you're not doing what you were doing last year is still a very important story.
Yeah. And in your case, I know it wasn't because I'm handsome. There was something else happening there. So that's origin story. Well, we've got time just to touch on one or two others that can be useful as initial frameworks for people to start rethinking their story on. What would you go to next? Would it?
I think to tap into what you just said, probably innovation, because
Mm.
once you've realized that something's not right in the world you want to be a part of, you go, hang on, other businesses do this, and I think I can do better, or I can do something more creative, more interesting. I can do it just a little bit better in a way that will make people happier. It will make the thing we're doing more fulfilling. So that aspect of innovation, why didn't you just go and work for someone else who's already doing it in a particular way? Why did you think it was worth you opening your own business to do it in a slightly different way? And you're not just going to call it different because different's not good enough. Otherwise, you would have worked for someone else. It's got to be that you wanted to do it better, that you're taking the risk of doing something on your own in your own way. So, classic example in the world today would be microbreweries and winemakers, following natural technique. They're going against the trends of a century of industrial beverage making and going, no, that's just not good enough. So I've got to take a bigger risk than just working for someone else to do it my own way and take the chance that not everyone will get it and understand it, but that people who do get it and understand it will be appreciative that I took the chance.
And that's an innovation facet, and it also is touching in a Venn diagram kind of way with craft,
Yes.
where you're taking a stand and say, look, everything is mass produced, but you know what? That handmade, handcrafted thing, there, if you can help us also become a light and alive to the joy of really putting our hands across that leather lounge that you've made, or sipping slowly and tasting every little bit of the grain that you fermented for your micro brewed beer, then that has a life after the initial purchase that keeps reinforcing the joy we've had because we really are feeling like we're part of your story.
Yep. And a flow on from this is, particularly if you're going to keep innovating, there is a tendency to think, if I do something new, that makes it collectible because it'll only be a small batch. There's a danger of going down the collectability path of going, only going to be a single batch of this. If it's because you want to find out if it's good and it's worth turning into part of the normal range, tell people that's the reason. This might be a one-off batch. If I like it and you like it, there might be a second batch. But if I don't really like it and you don't really like it, it's going to be the one-off trial. Don't artificially make things collectible because it fails the sniff test for authenticity. But saying, here is my most recent experiment, passes the authenticity sniff test.
Yeah. And of course, one last one of this list, provenance, is we often talk about it as a nice little shortcut, especially if you're starting something new, but the area you're based in or the field you're in has a long history of being known for something. Like, sticking with wine, like Shiraz within the Barossa is just known for that Cab Sav and the Coonawarra, cheese from certain regions, like the Fleurieu Peninsula. By accentuating how you're tapping into the provenance, those long-held roots, is a nice way to shortcut yourself to be at the same table as others.
People need to know how and why they can trust you, seeing you currently have a limited amount of experience. Well, if you can acknowledge that your limited experience is grounded in people who've done a very good job, places that produce good products, that you can explain the methodology you're using, that you can explain your quality control, and that all of these things link with good examples that have come before you, you can make it clear to people that even though you're new, you're not doing anything in a new way yet. You're grounding everything in things that were substantial. So even later when you have a go at an experiment and do something differently, your experiment is still going to be grounded in a good quality product, in good methodology, in good lessons, just applied in a new way.
All right, there's a link in the show notes. You can have a look at this paper and some more thinking about that paper to start reconsidering how you tell your story. And we are coming back to this topic again and again, believe me. And I want to come back next time we come to this topic, David, and we'll start with some very simple steps of getting the thoughts on paper.
Yep, the how-to steps.
Yes, yeah, that's it. But that will be continued. And after we've done that a few times, people will live happily ever after.
Well, they'll be able to explain the struggle, and if they didn't get through, they'll still have a better insight. And if they did get through, they'll have a very good story to help people believe in what they do.
Our 4 Ps. Number 3, problems. I asked the question for the best reason possible. Simple curiosity. Oscar Wilde.
One of the emails that I've received as we look at different problems people are having is an email I've got from Ivy from Golden North, which you've eaten Golden North ice cream, haven't you, David?
As a small child, I remember the lime ice cream from Golden North, which I was totally addicted to.
Yes. Well, for me, it's the honey, but the honey ice cream. I remember family trips up to the country to Laura to actually have Golden North honey ice cream. Back when, I think it was because of the way borders were put out in marketing areas with controlled dairy products back in those days. I'll have to look at that. That'd be a fascinating history topic to come back to. But no, it's lovely working with the people at Golden North. But I got an email because they received one of these emails going around with the headline, .au domain name deadline looming for Australian businesses. And the email is a legitimate one. It came from the Australian Domain Authority. They're the people charged with making sure that all the .au, whether it's .com.au or .net.au or .au domains, are all structured correctly, and you only get access to them if you meet the certain requirements. So it's a legitimate email. But there is a little bit of that high-pressure sell that's happening here, because September 20 in 2022 is the deadline for you, if you have a .com.au or a similar address at the moment, to get a priority allocation of the relevant .au. So we have talkedaboutmarketing.com. I also have the talkedaboutmarketing.com.au. So I received one of these notifications. Would I like to get talkedaboutmarketing.au? The same with Golden North. Would you like goldennorth.au? So Ivy was saying, what do we do? Now, the thing is here, this has been my advice to people, is personally, I think it's just a lovely little money-making scheme for the registrar. I know there are other places around the world with a top-level domain that's just the two letters denoting their region. But consumers, I think it'll be a long time before I say, hey, David, what was that place called? Grain Blend. And if you guess their web address, I'm pretty sure it's be a long time before you think, oh, would it be grainblend.au? Am I right?
Well, it would. Again, I got the same email and looked at it and went, marketing opportunity from the registrar, but I better buy it anyway.
Yeah, and that basically sums up my advice. If you've got one of these and you're listening to this before the 20th of September 2022, my advice is to take it. Most web places, web hosts and domain registrars are offering discounted pricing. Venture IP, which is one that we use a lot at this point in time, they've got them for $9 a year. You can buy up to 5 years out. So my advice to Golden North, but also to myself and other clients, just get them for 45 or less than $50. Take it off the table and just redirect it to your current main focused web address. So for me, it's all heading to talkedaboutmarketing.com. And then you've got your options open. If you're listening to this afterwards, well, then it just means that other people could have applied for your .au. So at the time this goes out, you'll have about a week or two up your sleeve before that deadline, but it's never too late to grab it. And my whole thinking with domains of different variations is, if it's relevant and if it's affordable, take it off the table so that someone else can't take your domain name and sneakily get some traffic that was really meant to be destined for you.
Yeah, if we jump back to the first section of today's podcast and you've got that person making life in your business very difficult, make sure they can't ever have a business name very similar to yours.
Our 4 Ps. Number 4. Perspicacity. The one duty we owe to history is to rewrite it. Oscar Wilde.
David, we have mentioned so far that, yes, you can't see me, but can you smell what I'm wearing?
Actually, all I can smell is my virtual pink coffee.
Or imagine if I was wearing Old Spice, that magnificently timeless cologne. Can you remember what it smells like? Have you ever smelt Old Spice?
I can. I remember my English grandfather wearing it when I was a little kid, and on him, because he was a World War II veteran, he was of that era and he had that gravitas, on him it smelt really good.
Exactly. It's like upholstery polish on a really nice old piece of furniture.
Yep.
It kind of works. You can't wear it yourself. So this last segment is all about perspicacity, helping us get stronger with our thinking and our intuitions. And Old Spice, of course, is much lauded as a great example from the realm of marketing and advertising in the way the brand was rejuvenated. Perhaps you could nutshell it for us.
Old Spice had pretty much gone the same way of World War II veterans. It got older and older until there was almost no one wearing it and almost no one paying attention, and it was just kind of in the corner of pharmacies being laughed at. And they realized you just couldn't sell it anymore with traditional marketing. And instead, they decided to pay some attention to the new inbound model of marketing of you've got to make things personal and they have to be entertaining and they have to be helpful and they have to provide information. And they got an NFL player in America and did an ad campaign based on the idea that he was the Old Spice guy. And the advert went gangbusters because rather than being a silly ad, it was a person who was recognizable, engaging with his audience. And after the initial Super Bowl advert, they would do things like get people to send in all their questions, and he would do live videos answering all the questions about when did he wear Old Spice, what did he think about, what did it make him feel like to wear it. So people were engaging directly with a famous, well-known football player, and this totally and utterly turned their situation around.
I remember using it in my social media marketing workshops back when it happened. It was a great piece to share and got people talking and thinking.
And perhaps would have been the first way for a lot of people to actually understand that social media as a form of content marketing was going to be really powerful for small business where you didn't have a particular marketing team and you didn't have a social media marketing specialist. You could do this yourself. You could put out entertaining stuff about what you did, and you could engage with people in a one-on-one immediate way, and they'd go, hang on, this is not just another ad going nowhere. I'm actually engaging with the company in a fun and potentially useful way.
It triggered a sense of intrigue and curiosity and fun uh, in it, and we'll embed a video of some of the original ads in the show notes so you can see them if you missed them. He was on a white horse, and just speaking to camera in a very stylistic way.
Hello, ladies. Look at your man. Now back to me. Now back at your man. Now back to me. Sadly, he isn't me. But if he stopped using lady-scented body wash and switched to Old Spice, he could smell like he's me. Look down. Back up. Where are you? You're on a boat with the man your man could smell like. What's in your hand? Back at me. I have it. It's an oyster with 2 tickets to that thing you love. Look again. The tickets are now diamonds. Anything is possible when your man smells like Old Spice and not a lady. I'm on a horse.
But it was also an innocent, naive time with social media before it became like today. And this is what the reason we're bringing this up is, can we take the play out of that playbook and apply that in the same way today? And I think it's a lot of things have changed. And for example, getting someone of his standing to be part of this without adding a few extra zeros to what they'd be wanting to charge in the first place would be something that might be inhibitive. And also, there's a lot more cynicism and saturation that's taking place within the social media realm from the behalf of content being put out, but also from content coming across our screens as users.
I think a big part of that would be now you would need to get a person who wants to transition from the thing they've done to maybe being someone who is some sort of influencer in social media, or at least is someone who is willing to slow down and change gear and try and get you to slow down and change gear and pay attention and smile and join in. And that is only getting harder and harder. At this year's advertising festival in France, there's data now suggesting that people don't spend more than 2.5 seconds on average paying attention to an ad on social media.
Yeah, which is a very short time to make it to actually get engaged. And just because there's so much waiting either side of what you can see on your screen.
And I think a big thing to think about here too is, in previous eras, a beautiful image in front of you, or an image that suddenly pops up on the screen with a guy sitting on a horse talking direct to camera. That was a bit odd. You paid attention. But now, between our phones, our laptops, our TVs, big screens out in the world, big screens everywhere, people are bombarded non-stop. So now more and more what is being seen is that people only pay attention to things that link with what they're already thinking about or that are really, really striking. And as time goes on, it's going to be harder and harder to be really striking. So in most cases now, the most likely thing that's going to work is someone that's thinking about, I want a new fragrance or I want a new container of shower gel. They're the person that's going to respond to the Old Spice ad because their head was already in a space where that might be interesting. So the idea that you can get through to everyone some of the time is getting more and more difficult. And instead you can get through to people who are already somewhat aligned with your message because of what they want to achieve, understand, or how they want to be entertained.
I think we're setting up for a discussion about inbound marketing so that the content is there waiting for when the consumer comes looking,
Precisely.
which is what we'll regroup on in episode 2 of this first series of talking about marketing. Let's splash a little Old Spice on that one for now. In fact, just talking about, here's the thing, just talking about it makes me want to dabble with a little splash, or is this rose-colored nasal functionality?
Man, I'm just hoping you had a shave with an electric razor, because if you get the stuff in a slight cut from razor burn, you're not going to want to do it again.
There you go. This is also good personal hygiene advice as well. David Olney, thank you.
Thank you, Steve Davis.
And you'll find the show notes at talkedaboutmarketing.com. You'll see the podcast blip there. And we'd love to hear from you. So flick us an email at podcast@talkedaboutmarketing.com. And David and I will have a look at that and either include some of your content into this program or respond to you directly. So podcast@talkedaboutmarketing.com.
Thank you for listening to Talking About Marketing. If you enjoyed it, please leave a rating or a review in your favourite podcast app. And if you found it helpful, please share it with others. Steve and David always welcome your comments and questions, so send them to podcast@talkedaboutmarketing.com. And finally, the last word to Oscar Wilde. There's only one thing worse than being talked about, and that's not being talked about.
Hi, Jeremy Cordeaux in the Court of Public Opinion. I'm just on air here to let you know that we'll be live streaming the Court of Public Opinion every Friday between 9 o'clock and 12 on jeremycordeaux.com. Please join us. We'd love to have you.